Hello, everyone. Welcome to Winthrop in the World. I'm Paul Baskin, and with us today is State Senator Lydia Edwards. Senator Edwards represents not only Winthrop, but East Boston and parts of Boston and also parts of Cambridge. Is that right?
Not Cambridge anymore.
Not
Uh,
Cambridge
we were
anymore.
we were redistricted, so my district is all of Winthrop, all of Revere, and then several parts of Boston, including East Boston, the North End, the West End, North End waterfront, downtown crossing area, Beacon Hill, Back Bay, little bit of Fenway.
Right. Got it. That's quite an important district. It seemed like it is.
Big digs. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you won. 70% of the vote you got, including about 55% in Winthrop, even though you were running against a person from Winthrop. That's how do you feel about that?
I feel great. I mean, I feel like I've put the work in. And I'm honored that I was rehired, and I'm going to continue to keep fighting for Winthrop and Revere and Boston, and that's just my job. So I'm honored to keep having it.
And what do you see as the main reasons why you're winning here?
Ah, um, I hope that one of the main reasons is that people see I'm working really hard and trying my best to get funding for Winthrop, trying to make sure Winthrop has a voice on Beacon Hill. In general, for my entire district, I think I ran on housing. I talked about my passion for housing, and I've really helped produce and lead, um, in many cases, state conversations on housing and the recent housing bond bill. Um, I I hope it is one of the reasons why is I really knocked and met so many people in Winthrop and heard their stories, and I haven't forgotten them. I haven't forgotten about the parents who are struggling with a child who has addiction. I haven't forgotten about people who are very much struggling and on the close on the edge and don't have the money to pay rent. I haven't forgotten about our seniors, and so I hope that they know that when I go to work, they're top of mind, and I
Well,
hope that that's why
so you hit
they
there
vote
on
for
a
me.
couple of the main topics that are front and center right now, Winthrop. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. 3A being one of them, school override being another, and there's certainly more than that. The situation with the environmental situation in town as well. Let's look at 3A. So people remind people 3A is the MBTA Communities Act. It is essentially the idea was to require that communities with MBTA service um, provide zoning around, at least with the idea of providing more multifamily housing around transit. Do you support that bill passed, I think, fairly almost unanimously? You weren't there at the time that was passed, or were you? And your position on 3A is what?
So no, I wasn't there. I didn't write it, didn't vote for it. It had passed and was law under my predecessor, Joe Boncore. I came in to the implementation stage, which is really where it comes from the state house and senators to the localities, right? This is the part where and that's traditionally how most state law works, right? We pass it at the state level,
Right.
giving permissions or prohibitions on the localities, and then they take with that what they can do, you know. And in terms of supporting the law or not, it does have some issues. I will say that and wasn't written in a way that I think um, was as direct and clear. And a lot of the debate we're having today is because of that. So, in terms of the implementation and the law itself, there's definitely room for improvement. In terms of the concept that we should be building around transportation and really encouraging localities to do that, it's the law, but I also think as a concept, I do support that.
Right. And then what's your take on what you see going on in Winthrop here, where this town council just voted not to comply with the state on this?
Well, I understand the town council voted down a plan. We're still technically in compliance until the 31st. And I understood a lot of their votes. I'll say that. I understood the pro people, I understood the anti people, and I understood the present. I think that someone voted present. A lot of this conversation is incredibly frustrating because it could all be resolved or at least clarified with the stroke of the pen from this SJC, from the Supreme Judicial Court. That's really where my headspace has been.
Right.
I don't want to go so far down the road in either way, saying let's just go ahead and 100% do either option, when at the end of the day the court could come down and for all of the headache that the pros or the cons have said could mean nothing.
Right.
I'm deeply saddened by the fact that so many people have become quite vicious on this topic. um, I've kind of had to pull away from online discussions, and people's character being attacked
Right.
over their opinion about a zoning law.
Right.
I think it's a bit much.
Why do you think that's happening in this town? I mean, is it specific, do you think, to 3A, or is there something broader in the air in terms of why a town like this doesn't seem to be able to have a civil conversation on something like this?
I genuinely, if I knew why, I think I would do my best to try and resolve this. But I don't know. I don't know why. This has really triggered something in a lot of people, a lot of anger. Um, and, what I hope and I think we should all recognize we're adults, we're allowed to disagree, and we can still actually genuinely want the same thing, just different approaches. I oftentimes talk about myself and Jeff. Jeff is my colleague.
Jeff Turco, you're
Uh,
talking about
Jeff,
state representative.
so, yes, Jeff Turco and I think if you were to line us up, like not so much politically, but in terms of perspective on how to approach different problems, you would find that both of us would say the opposite of the other.
Right.
But I think you would also find that our heart space is very much aligned. We do believe that education is a fundamental building block to economic opportunity, and that children should have access to a good education. We fundamentally want this world to be safer
Right.
for children, for our seniors. We fundamentally are patriots and love this country and want to make sure our veterans are taken care of. And so, how he and I choose to approach it, I see it as a back and forth that is a healthy discourse, so that I'm not taking everything 100% towards Lydia's way, and he's not taking everything 100% towards Jeff's way. And guess what?
Right.
That middle back and forth probably represents a majority of the town.
Well,
So
it may,
I
but not what we're seeing, I suppose. Just so that people understand, you're both Democrats, but you're, in terms of where you are on the spectrum in the party, is quite different. So that's what you're
I
referring
would say
to.
he's a more moderate center Democrat, and I would say I'm definitely more progressive.
Right, but I've seen you both get along, not only get along, but show up at joint events and like you're saying, speak constructively to each other. And
I've
it
been
just,
to his house. I've gone to dinner at his house. I know his kids. I refuse to reduce any human being to a moment in time and an opinion on one topic.
right.
I
And
just won't let that happen. That's just not. It's not. It's not being an adult.
And yet we're
People.
seeing this in this town. Yet we're seeing this go on in this town over and over again. I guess I've already asked you why it's happening. Maybe there's just
I
no
don't
answer
know.
to it. So, I mean, some of the reasons why people put out there for 3 a.m. and some of them are more technical and procedural, but
Yeah,
in terms of what people are actually saying, I mean, one, I think there's concern about losing property values. If there's more, obviously, there's more housing, then everybody's house maybe is worth less. That's one way to think of it. There's congestion in town, and it sounds like people conflate car congestion with human being congestion. And I mean, I'd like to hear you on that. And then also maybe there's also, there may be some nativist elements to it possibly. And I'm wondering if you see any of that.
look, I mean, at the end of the day, I come from a small town. I grew up on military bases where my mother retired in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan. The town I grew up in has 2,000 people then and probably has 2,000 people now. And there is something beautiful to a small town. And if that's, and some people want to fight for that,
Right.
that's okay. They want a small town. They want to know their neighbors. They want a certain level of density. I mean, they went out of their way to go to that town in some cases. Some people left Boston. Some of their families left Boston to have a small town experience. That is not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. Okay. So let's just put that out there. Wanting to live in a small town with a small population is okay. It's beautiful. Okay. That's number one. So I don't consider that nativist. I don't consider that NIMBY. I mean, there's some people who want to live on a farm. They want to live in a small town. Some people like to live in the city. That's okay. In terms of the congestion concerns, all very fair and valid. But I would say that congestion isn't just how many people are there, it's the planning that goes around how people are able to move, how you build your roads, how you build your infrastructure, how you build alternative ways for people to move. So it's not just numbers, it's also planning or lack thereof. So just to be clear about congestion, right?
And
Um,
can I stop you and ask you how you assess Winthrop? This is a town that appears to be very car only. And I mean, there's no bike paths at all, although there's plans to build one. There's no calming measures at all on any of the roads in town. It seems to be a town that's completely built to fully emphasize car travel. Is that your assessment of what you're seeing? And does something need to be done about that?
I see that it's not atypical to any other small town that I've been in, honestly. Honestly,
Yeah.
it is very much Americana to have cars. It is part of the our psyche, our heartbeat, and that's not a bad thing. I will say, if it's not planned for, and if you don't see, if you almost are stopping plans for any other way to live, then that's not helpful for our environmental future. That's not helpful because it's not a practical future. Also, that's where you're going to have you're planning for congestion then, because you're dealing then with, I get a car, my husband gets a car, my teenage kids get a car, so that's four cars,
Right.
right, for one household. Line us up on the street. Eventually, just the commute's going to be incredibly congested. So I think we need to be thinking a little broader in terms of what's the future we want for Winthrop. I want a greener future, right? I want a future where I don't have to plan my entire life around whether I'm going to get either parking or get home in 45 minutes versus 20 minutes, depending on whether I time, my leaving the door when I leave the door. So those are things that have to do with how we plan around our cars and plan for other alternative
Right.
infrastructure. So that's why I put a lot of effort and time into the ferry,
Right.
and I'm still pushing for that. I believe so deeply in being able to commute to Boston by boat,
Right.
and we have the infrastructure for it. We just recently got an earmark for $900,000 for a new boat, with the hope that we could possibly get full weekend service, so Monday through Sunday, and also year round. I mean, we're pushing for a real commuter vessel, and finally separating from Quincy.
Right. Well,
So,
I was going to ask you about that because it's obviously right now it's the service even on the weekdays and in season it's only runs like maybe four times a day and it's a 40-minute
no,
ride all the way to Quincy and it's probably two or three times the cost of an MBTA ticket. Are those things that
correct,
are, yeah,
correct. These are things, but see, to me, that is what, instead of, I am less focused on how we're building the streets for the cars. I am demonstrating through the policies, through the funding, of looking at alternative ways to help people move. And the more people on those boats, the fewer people there are that are inclined to drive. So I think that that's one of the biggest issues for people who want to become less car dependent, is the infrastructure that is dependable, that is affordable, that is not a car, and trying to build that up.
okay, so I want to keep asking about budgetary questions, but I obviously want to hear you on the school situation. I realize that that's not that the override is not a state issue, it's a town issue. But I mean, do you have a thought as to what you saw happen when you watched Winthrop reject the override for the schools, almost $5 million that the schools say they need? They've been operating, what, 15 years without an override. They say there's some pretty dire consequences coming for the Winthrop school system if something doesn't happen. What do you see?
I mean, I try my best because I'm not one of the taxpayers on this particular issue. Okay. So I try my best to say that this is, you know, unlike Jeff, who is, this is kind of a conversation for Winthrop. I would have loved to see that the override happened, but I also respect that it didn't, and Winthrop chose not to vote for it. Um, it doesn't impact my job or my fight for Winthrop's public schools. So I have gotten, I think, almost well over to close to $1 million, if not at least $1 million in earmarks for the public schools and trying to make sure that we're building up different infrastructure there, whether it's for multilingual students and their parents. We just recently put $50,000 in to help start bring back music. And so my ears to the ground. I speak regularly with the superintendent and try to figure out what state dollars I can bring, and I will. So my dedication to Winthrop Public Schools, I'm a public school student. I'm a product of the public schools. And I also had band. I had driver's ed at the time. They had all of those things, home ec, all of that in the public schools for free. And that changed me. I didn't realize how rare it is and how much we need to bring that back. Trade schools as well. So I think what I heard from a lot of people is we're just going to try again. We're going to fight the good fight. I mean, I think the firehouse also was not successful.
That's right. Yeah, that's been a
So
push for a while. Yes.
it may be just that it's hard to pass an override, regardless of the topic in
Right.
Winthrop.
Well, and also hard to pass. Yeah, hard to pass budgetary. I mean, that's one thing I
Right.
want to. I mean, again, you're not on the town council here, but I mean, one thing I am generally curious about is your assessment of the financial health of Winthrop. Do you have a take on that as to whether? I mean, because now we're talking about the schools. They're talking about 3A possibly costing the town access to state money. Talking about the firehouse, and flood mitigation. It's going to be a major thing. I mean, how do you have an assessment of, or how much level of confidence do you have in Winthrop's ability to afford all this?
I will say that the confidence that I have in Winthrop lies a lot in my confidence that I have in Tony Marino. That town
He's
manager,
a town manager, yes.
I don't think people understand how much he blows up my phone and Jeff's phone for state dollars and how he's applying for things consistently. And he is fighting for and getting everything, every single dollar that is put through, he is on it and getting that money. So in terms of fiscal management, I want to give all kudos and credit to Tony. Um, Tony Marino.
And a new assistant they just hired as well to help.
Yes, and the new assistant he just hired. Yes, sorry, so not forgetting that as well. So, and I think he needed that assistant, someone who can help with the grant writing while he's doing the management of the town. I mean, he has grown exponentially in terms of the funding and the fiscal health of the town. I'm not going to sit here and say that I've looked at the numbers like
Right?
everybody else.
Yeah.
I
No, it's
haven't
not.
looked at the budget for Revere either. I haven't looked at the entire budget for Boston out of fairness. So I don't want to sit here and assess A plus, B plus, AAA bonding.
Right.
I'm here when people say we need X, I try my best to get X.
And again, on 3A, well, this is how all these things tie together. When you talked about Tony calling you for state money and help, how do you anticipate these conversations changing if in fact Winthrop sticks to its position of not complying with 3A and there's not a court decision that somehow interrupts that dynamic?
So, I mean, and that's what's the most frustrating thing because if the court decision would just come down saying you are or are not limited to this discretionary funding for these monies,
Right.
then I think we'd be in a different understanding and a different approach about how to deal with this particular this decision to say yes or say no. So if you want the most cautious position, the most cautious would be to say let's just comply, apply for all the grants that we need, and then assess later on if we don't have to deal with it. But I can't. I mean, I don't want to sit there and give a parade of horribles about what's going to happen to the town of Winthrop if we don't comply with a particular law. I can commit only I'm fighting like hell regardless, and I have committed publicly. If Winthrop stands on one side, I'm not going to force the issue. So
Right.
if Winthrop says this is not for Winthrop, and they're willing to take that risk,
Right. Do you see yourself being part of any kind of effort within the legislature to somehow amend 3A?
um, not until I understand why and how we have to amend it. And that's going to probably be informed by the court. If the court is saying this is unclear, we might have to do that. If the court is saying it's unconstitutional, we might have to do something. There's a lot of guidance we're all waiting on. And it is a bit frustrating because I would love nothing more than to not have this issue come into 2025 with us. I would love to think that, come the 31st, everything is resolved. We understand, and I don't know, what's taking the court so long, but it is frustrating.
Right. And I assume too that we're also looking at an environment for the next 4 years where federal money into Massachusetts and therefore into towns, which we also get federal money too. That's going to be different potentially. But your
Oh, I
assessment?
I think we can expect that our federal funds, will not be as I, I can I yes, we I don't know that we have as friendly an administration um coming in,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
We don't, yeah.
And also, I
So,
mean, that also sort of reminds us again, again, how these things all tie together. Our approach to immigration in this country, and you mentioned earlier about how the people of Winthrop, a lot of people want the small town, want to keep it the size it is, but I'm just want to hear you as best you can on whether our need for more, is there a need in this town for more housing for, and again, people talk about at the lower income end. These are a lot of these are the people who do a lot of the jobs in the town that may not get done by otherwise, I guess. I'm just wondering if you're at all concerned that the coming position on immigration in this country and the current position of the town on 3A potentially makes it tougher for the people of this town to get the services they want.
I mean, that's a lot of potentials, right?
Okay, yeah,
And assuming that they're all connected, because I think 3A would be an issue regardless of whether we have a migrant issue or not. I think that they're related and also not related. So the issues would exist regardless of, one is not feeding the other is not feeding, you know,
right.
migrant crisis isn't feeding 3A, 3A isn't feeding the migrant crisis.
Okay, okay.
All right. So in terms of, the economic impact of not building or not building enough is what I should say. That's different, right? Not building at a healthy rate, which honestly, Winthrop has zoned at a healthy rate. It has zoned at a very healthy rate in terms of its growth. But the economic impact for any town that won't grow, right, um, is that you're going to lose your young people. That I have seen. That I understand. You lose your young people, the very people who you want to eventually become the next town manager, the next principal, the teachers, and so on and so forth, your firefighters, your police officers. You will lose them in droves because they cannot afford to stay here. And there's no options for them to stay except with their parents sometimes, which is not horrible, but sometimes you want to live on your own or start your own family and you need some more room. So I think oftentimes people forget about that. There's a second generation that just doesn't have any options. They're going to leave.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's the goal.
No, I don't think it is. I think we're also hearing that relative to the school override too. Again, not your issue, but there's certainly people who fear that without a healthy school system, again, you'll lose people. You'll lose people who won't come back to the town because they want to go people want to go to a town that has a good school system. It's usually one of the main draws, isn't it, for
You
new.
also lose, I mean, listen, one of the issues of the housing crisis that I found when I went to the Cape, which you can find in other places, was they couldn't find municipal workers
Right.
because people were not going to, I mean, and teachers, forget about it. The teachers would come 1 year and then they were done. I'm not commuting here anymore because there's no housing on the Cape. Can't
Right.
afford it on the Cape.
Right.
They would commute on boat. They would
Yeah.
come there for a couple days and they said enough, enough, and then they would inevitably lose really good, talented teachers. Um, no matter, even if they could pay them a lot, they were not going to stay. And that's the question: is are you positioning yourself in a way that you are not even allowing for your middle class, your workforce, to have a home? And that's a real concern. Winthrop could end up positioning itself as a nice retirement city or town, which, all right, that's not bad, but even retirement towns need their streets cleaned, need their kids educated, need, a fire force, like they need people to be part of that,
Sure.
the workers.
And again, sort of along these lines, maybe you've seen that the Globe did a piece recently, which looked at it lined up all 351 cities and towns in the state by their demographics, and it showed that Winthrop was number 2 in the entire state, only behind Nantucket in the growth in Hispanic population, up more than 10%, and number 1 in the entire state in the loss of white population, Winthrop.
Hmm.
I'm wondering what you think when you hear those kinds of statistics. I mean, I assume there's an attitude of welcoming to the diversity. I also wonder if maybe the speed at which that's happening maybe having some effects on the politics in the town.
So I'm still digesting what you just told me. You said Winthrop is
Number 2 in the entire state of 251 season towns. This is according to Globe data, which for the last 5 years it was from 2018 to 2023, so 5-year period. Number 2 in the entire state in the growth in Hispanic residents. Number 1 in the entire state in the decline in white residents. That's Winthrop. And I'm wondering what that effects that could be having on our town.
well, did it explain why the decline was happening?
No, it's a brief article. It's just statistics. In event, I can leave that, but I mean, but it is curious. I mean, it is noteworthy. I mean, out of the entire state, it's number
Oh
one.
no, I mean I'm still digesting. Honestly, I think it's a surprise. It's not what I see, but maybe I'm
Yeah,
not seeing everything then.
yeah,
And so I haven't seen that. I don't know that that does impact the politics as much. I do know it has impacted the lived experience of a lot of the teachers and a lot of our educators who I will give them incredible kudos for the fact that they have done everything they can to embrace the kids and to assure that you may come here and you and your parents both speak Spanish, but you are welcome here and you will get educated here, and and you are going to be loved and cared for. And I just want to give again credits to Winthrop Public Schools for that sense that I got from them. That's why they were so excited about the funding for the para program.
mhm,
um, and in terms of other attitudes, shifting demographics oftentimes do bring different perspectives, good and bad.
yeah.
Good and bad. I know that was there a new Mexican restaurant opening up in Winthrop?
There's
I thought
I
there
believe there's a
was.
new Colombian one that's
Colombian.
opening. Yeah, and
So,
yeah,
that's to me, that's an immigrant story. Isn't
yeah,
it beautiful?
yeah.
I mean, to me, that's beautiful.
Yeah, no, no, it's there's a lot of that going on. Actually. Yeah. Okay, so we're getting maybe quickly on this whole controversy was one of the questions in the election about the audit, the state legislature. Do you have a take
Mhm.
on the wisdom of that? I mean, if not the specific way in which it was proposed, does it feel to you that somehow the people of Massachusetts want a little more transparency out of the legislature, and that somehow needs to be delivered to the people by the by you and other members of the legislature?
I think that they spoke resoundingly on
Yeah,
question one,
well
right?
they
I
did.
think not a little bit of, I mean, they want to see it all. I think that there are some practical questions of how it's going to happen. Honestly, and what areas of transparency are legal or constitutional. That whether and how the Senate president thinks of who should be the head of a certain committee. I don't know that the average voter really wants to be that deep into the Senate president's headspace,
Okay.
right? Or the speaker's headspace, like who the speaker wants to name as chair of Ways and Means. I don't know that that's a transparency. What I understood from people is why, if all of us were outside and all of us showed up and all of us fought hard, it didn't pass,
All right.
right?
Well,
That's what I understand is the transparency that a lot of people want to see. They want to see more committee votes, like when we go to release a bill. Why don't we see who voted for what to release it? That's what I understood. I could be wrong. That was the kind of transparency that a lot of people are craving to understand, and a lot of other state legislators do have around the country.
right.
In terms of its implementation, well, um, I think the House, before we went out on break, or recently just passed a bill saying you will have your your transparency, and your transparency is amounts to the state auditor being able to pick an independent auditor to implement this.
Yeah. So
So,
I'm wondering if maybe what you're saying is maybe we don't need an audit per se, maybe not, but that somehow the people of the state are telling you that they want somehow to be different in a way that they can understand it better. And that's something that you think the legislators are hearing and will
I think that's
respond
what
to? Is that
I think that is what we're hearing or what we're responding to. What I will tell you, what I don't think people are looking for is the notes or thought process necessarily um, of our leadership. I mean, if they are, I think that it's an overreach, and that's one of the biggest concerns is that the auditor is part of the executive kind of constitutional officer branch. She's a separate branch for the auditor to be able to you can abuse through inquiry, you know, and go too far. And so there's a real concern about whether we strike the right balance. But I will tell you this, my colleagues, and especially in the Senate, I don't work in the House, we have consistently met the standard and met the moment. When we are happy to release our on our Senate committee, we release our votes. We have our own audits. You can find our audits online. So, we meet
okay?
the moment.
Just one last thing. I mean, it's a classic thing to ask a politician what their longer term plans are. You've only now 2 years in, but you've already won 3 elections. I mean, are you sort of thinking in terms of where you see yourself 10 years down the line or anything like that? I mean, it's been noted that you're doing a pretty good job of being on the winning side of a lot of other candidates and other races in the state. So that suggests at least an interest and an aptitude for that. I mean, anything you would just want to say the to be determined, or do you have anything more you can sort of tell people about what you're thinking?
I think it's to be determined. I will say, the thing is, being in the Senate, having a little time is actually a good thing. It's a little for me, it was different as a city councilor, became very repetitious and 20 years as a
You're
city
talking about,
councilor,
so people know
you don't
Boston
know.
City Council, Boston
Yeah, I
City
was a
Council,
Boston
yes.
City councilor. It's not like you grow in leadership. It's not like you grow in influence in the Boston City Council, so much so as when you are a senator, you can. And so I could see myself being a really good senator for some time. I could see myself going off to work in housing directly. You know,
And
I don't know where
you
I'm going to
also have
go.
you have a military career going on the side, I understand too.
I do love it too. Yes. And that's that, when I think of a lot of the opportunities, that would require me to give up the political career if I wanted to go active duty. And it is a beautiful career. I mean, the people I've met, I am so incredibly impressed by. I'm very humbled.
Well, Senator Lydia Edwards, I'm grateful for you taking the time for this today. It's a very informative, very useful, I think, for the people of town to hear this from you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to doing it again.
Take care.
Take care. Bye.